Chapter 27, O Thou Art the Man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Thou Art the Man by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. Chapter 27. Cora expatiates. Heir presumptive. How the phrase rang in my ears last night when I lay down to sleep after another long, dull evening, for the most part alone with Lady Selina, Lady Penrith having retired soon after we left the dining-room, leaving the spinster and me to amuse each other. The spinster is a late bird, and complains of the dull evenings here, and talks of the superior attractions of other houses owned by other nieces, the large house parties with the constant succession of guests, the theatricals, the charades, the dumb crambo, and music, and cards. Yes, this dissipated old person actually sighs for a riotous game at roulette. Heir presumptive. Of the two lives, my uncle's, so far as I can judge, is the better. His 2 years of seniority count for nothing against my father's habits, late hours, and, I fear, deep drinking. Yet an accident might alter the situation in a breath, an accident, and my father might be the Earl of Penrith, and master of this house. Master here, where he has been treated with contumely, sole owner of the house whose door has been shut against him for the last 10 years. Life hangs by so thin a thread. No, I won't suffer my thoughts to dwell upon such possibilities. I'm not particularly fond of my uncle, and I owe him nothing, since anything I enjoy in this house is given to me by his wife. But I won't indulge in castle building upon such a ghastly foundation. Notwithstanding which resolve, I could not resist the temptation of drawing Lady Selina on the subject of the Penrith property when she and I were left alone, and I had to perform my nightly task of sorting her worsteds and admiring her hideous blanket. She is one of the people who I think that high art begins and ends with muddy greens and dingy yellows, when, if they had eyes to see, they would know that the leading note of high art is brilliant colour. I have been rambling about his lordship's estate, said I. What pretty old homesteads and farm buildings, and also neat and substantial. These homesteads and barns are monuments of my niece's folly. She has squandered her money upon Penrith's property, and her own flesh and blood will never be 1 penny richer for all she has spent. What a pity she has no son to inherit the estate. Ah, that would have made all the difference, sighed Lady Selina. Here is my niece, Lady Hilborough, with an enormous family, and my sister, Lady Ranthorpe, with 3 great hulking boys at Eton and Cooper's Hill, and 2 more in the nursery, and here is poor Sybil, childless. That is her misfortune, poor girl, but it does not excuse her folly in lavishing tens of thousands upon her husband's estate. Why should she not spend her money on improvements? She might spend it upon Ellerslie, which she can leave to her own family. Ellerslie is perfection. There is very little room for spending money. She could buy more land. There is always land to be bought nowadays, and ridiculously cheap. She ought to have quadrupled her own stake rather than sunk a fortune upon her husband's property. Penrith was almost a pauper when he married, but she has paid off every mortgage, and doubled the value of his farms by her improvements. No doubt it has amused her to improve. I can fancy nothing more delightful than messing about a large estate, picking old buildings to pieces and putting them together again, seeing order and beauty where all was squalor and ugliness. All very well if there had been an heir, but in the existing state of things, sheer lunacy, said Lady Selina decisively. And if Penrith were to die, my father, whom Lady Penrith detests, would be enriched by the wealth she has lavished. He would spring at once from poverty to riches, and his riches would be derived from her, an unencumbered estate, land in the perfection of high farming, tenants who know they are better off than any other tenants in Cumberland. He would owe all to her, and could turn her out of doors if he liked, as Penrith turned him out 2 days ago. Well, I won't dwell upon the thought. This journal of mine is not a starched composition, but it shall not be ghastly, and I won't let my mind brood upon the chances that hang by the fine-spun thread of one life. But if I dismiss one hideous subject, shake off the gloom of one idea, other fancies crowd in upon me as dark or darker. I cannot get the thought of that murdered girl out of my mind. Curious as I have been about that tragic story, I had resolved not to ask any questions of the servants, but I have broken down in that commendable resolution. A lady never talks to servants except in a purely businesslike manner. Put out my blue gown. Put away my red. Where are my satin shoes? And so on. Nothing more interesting than an Ollendorff dialogue should ever pass between mistress and maid. Well, I am as much a lady as I can be, but I am first a woman, and I am devoured by a morbid curiosity that must be satisfied. The horror of that murder haunts me. A young woman, young and beautiful, full of the pride of life, caught like a hunted fawn in a wood, caught and slaughtered by a raging maniac, for the epilepsy that hungers for blood must be lunacy under its most revolting aspect. No one saw her struggles. If she had time to cry for help, no ear heard her cry. In the loneliness and darkness, the murderer's knife did its trick. I know all about it now. The picture presented by Lady Selina was vague and shadowy, but last night I let her ladyship's maid come into my room after her mistress had gone to bed, and while she was brushing my hair, I led up to the story of Marie Arnold's death. The woman has all the ghoulish relish for horrors which seems natural to persons in that sphere, and she was charmed to dilate upon every detail. She took immense credit to herself for having been at Ellerslie at the time. One of her male relatives could have been no more proud had he ridden along that avenue of guns we all know so well in the Balaclava charge. She was at Ellerslie. She followed in the murdered girl's funeral procession. She never hopes to see such a funeral again. She distinctly used the word hope. She was really very interesting. She conjured up the image of a young woman in all her showy foreign beauty. She suggested the unrevealed link between her and Sir Joseph. Everybody in the steward's room had suspected that she was something nearer and dearer than an adopted daughter, though she had been put somewhat in the background, and when they saw the poor old gentleman's grief after her death, they were sure they had guessed right. And then she described Braddon Mountford as a man from whom no evil could have been anticipated. So handsome, such a gentleman, always polite to the servants, though he kept to himself very much. He had no valet, and on the morning before the murder he had been in his own room packing for some hours. The servants noticed a change in him at luncheon that day. He was in the garden with Miss Higginson after luncheon, and later in the afternoon my informant saw him going into his own room again, and he looked pale and agitated. Very much upset was her expression. She was sitting at her needlework by a window in the corridor, and she could hear him walking up and down his room and throwing things about, and when she looked into the room after he had gone downstairs, she found his portmanteau still open and his books and things scattered about, as if he had been too upset to get on with his packing. He was seen by one of the men going out into the garden again, but at dinner there was no sign of him, nor of Miss Arnold. And then she told me how Miss Arnold had also seemed very much upset at luncheon, and had left the room before the meal was finished, and she told me that there was no doubt in her mind that poor Miss Arnold was deeply in love with Mr. Mountford. "And he with her?" I asked. "Oh, no, miss," says the woman. "It was a regular game of cross purposes. Mr. Mountford was in love with my young mistress. One could see that with half an eye, but there was someone else in love with Miss Arnold, and had been for a long time." "Who was that?" asked I. "You might be offended, miss, if I was to say." Her meaning flashed upon me in a moment. "You mean my father?" "Yes, miss. Mr. Urquhart was very much attached to Miss Arnold. He wanted to marry her, but she wouldn't have him. One of the gardeners overheard their talk in the conservatory one afternoon. He was at work behind the tree ferns, and they didn't know he was there, and they talked quite free, and the young man didn't like to show himself after they began to talk, so he stopped quietly there till after they left the conservatory. Mr. Urquhart was quite violent, carried away by his feelings, the young man said, but Miss Arnold was very haughty and determined. She couldn't have been prouder had she been a duchess." This revelation throws a new light upon my father's character. I did not think passionate love was in his line, even when he was 10 years younger, and that he could be in love with the poor dependent while the millionaire heiress was in the house, to be wooed and won. That was strange. And then, when this poor girl was dead, he had set himself to win the heiress, and had failed dismally. I asked Ferriby if she and her fellow servants believed in Mr. Mountford's guilt. "I'm afraid there's no doubt about it, miss," she answered, shaking her head. "He was the nicest of gentlemen, but he was not a bit like himself that day. Several of us saw the change in him, and he must have killed her in a fit of madness. They say his poor mother was mad for many years, and died in a madhouse. If he wasn't guilty, why would he run away? Yes, that flight of his was the strongest evidence against him." "Was no one ever else suspected?" I asked. "No one, miss. Not by any one of us. But Sir Joseph, he would never believe that Mr. Mountford was the murderer. He told the steward so. He believed that the poor young lady was killed by a tramp for the sake of the jewellery she was wearing." "Was her jewellery taken?" "No, miss, not a thing. But then Sir Joseph said the murderer must have been surprised by Mr. Mountford's approach before he had time to rob his victim, and had slipped off through the wood without being seen by the 2 stablemen who were searching for the poor young lady. That was Sir Joseph's idea, but we didn't see it. If Mr. Mountford was innocent, he'd no call to run away, even if those who were interested in him over-persuaded him." "You mean your mistress," said I. The woman nodded significantly. "Yes, miss. My mistress and Mr. Urquhart were both mixed up in it. They acted for the best, no doubt, but if the poor gentleman was innocent, they made him look guilty." They made him look guilty. I have thought of those words a good deal since her ladyship's maid uttered them. May not one of those concerned in the wretched man's flight have meant to damage him rather than to aid? There can be no doubt of Miss Higginson's good faith, but my father's motive is not so obvious. I am afraid I am as much of a ghoul as Ferriby, for ever since that young woman brushed my hair last night, I have been haunted by the image of the young, amiable, handsome man tormented by one of the direst diseases that afflict humanity, a disease which can change the man who would not hurt a worm into a bloodthirsty murderer. So haunted have I been all day by the ghastly suggestion of a kindly and courteous gentleman suddenly transformed into a human wild beast, that I have been absolutely unable to stay quietly indoors, least of all to endure solitary confinement with Lady Selina, which I should have to endure if I had not taken the key of the fields. Lady Penrith retired to her own room after breakfast with the meagre excuse of having letters to write. I believe she really does cover reams of notepaper in the course of her correspondence with innumerable aunts and cousins, among the latter of whom there is always one who is just engaged or just going to be married, and who requires extra sympathy and something magnificent in the way of a wedding present. But I doubt if aunts or cousins are profiting much by her ladyship's present seclusion, as I shrewdly suspect that her only correspondent is Mr. Coverdale, and that he sits in her morning room waiting for wires from that clerical knight-errant. I left the castle soon after her disappearance, and in my purposeless wanderings on the moor, whom should I meet but Mr. Dewsnap, the family doctor, the dapper bachelor who attends her ladyship and my uncle for any small ailment, and who generally has a patient or two among the castle household. He has been allowed to look at my tongue and feel my pulse on one or two occasions, and has been disappointed to discover me a wiry little person, never good for more than 3 visits. He was riding an elderly white pony, but at the sight of my trim tailor gown and toque, jumped off and put the bridle over his arm. He looks about 40, an elderly young man, very neat in his dress, with, I fancy, some pretension to lady-killing, and above all, he is an inveterate gossip. He seemed delighted at the opportunity of talking to me. For Mr. Coverdale, I may be only a plain young woman, but for the family practitioner, I am the young lady of Killander Castle, an earl's niece, and worthy of attention. Under ordinary circumstances, I should certainly have kept him very much in his place, and he would have remounted his ancient steed in 5 minutes. But in my present mood I was delighted to get a talk with a man who could tell me all about that horrible malady which I had been brooding upon in connection with Mr Mountford. We talked of the weather, and then I said casually, "No doubt you are able to read all the local meteorological signs, for I am told you've lived in this neighbourhood for a good many years." "Except when I was walking the hospital in London, I have hardly ever lived anywhere else," answered he. "My father had the only good practice between here and Workington. I began my professional career as his assistant, and I have continued as his successor. I doubt if I shall ever extend my travels beyond these hills and moors, A country practice gives a vast variety of experience." "No doubt. You must have seen many curious cases in all these years," said I, walking slowly along the footpath while the medico sauntered at my side, and the medico's horse crept along, cropping the russet sward as he went. "I wonder if you remember that terrible event at Ellerslie Park 10 years ago?" "If you mean the murder of Marie Arnold, it would not be easy for me to forget it," replied the doctor. "I was acquainted with that unfortunate young lady. She was the most beautiful woman I ever saw." "Was she handsomer than my aunt, Lady Penrith?" "Oh, quite another style of beauty. A more brilliant style, distinctly southern, a richer colouring. I own to a weakness for rich colouring." He looked at my drab complexion, hesitated, and added, "Though where there is an intellectual expression, where mind lights the face, colouring is of secondary importance." With what weariness of spirit I have heard that specious lie about my intellectual expression, heard it from the lips of men whom shone in every look that I was of no more account in their sight than if my face had been cut out of wood. "I see you greatly admired that poor girl," said I. Mr. Dewsnap's only answer was a profound sigh. "Can you believe that Mr. Mountford was her murderer?" I asked. "My dear Miss Urquhart," cried the creature, growing disgustingly familiar, "I can believe anything of an epileptic subject, just as I can believe anything of a madman. From the moment I knew Mountford was epileptic, and heard of his low spirits and discomposure on the day of the murder, I had little doubt of his guilt. That gloomy agitation presaged an attack, and there is no doubt that alone in the wood the devil of epilepsy seized upon him, and as the fit passed it left him like the demoniac of old, panting with fierce impulses, thirsting for blood. And with that savage rage upon him he met that poor girl, seized her as the tiger seizes its prey, and killed her more swiftly than the tiger kills. I have thought it all out. The image of the victim has haunted me." He stifled a sob, and I began to feel more kindly towards him. "Yes," he continued after a pause, "the man who I had only seen as a calm, well-mannered gentleman was the fiend who killed Marie Arnold. The same, but not the same. And when the deed was done, he fell down beside his victim, exhausted, in a comatose sleep, and on awakening from which memory was a blank. He might remember nothing of that savage crime. He might feel nothing but a confused sense of trouble." "Have you heard what became of him after his escape from the lock-up?" I asked. "No one in this neighbourhood has any actual knowledge of his fate. He may have landed somewhere along the coast, within a few miles of Ardliston, before the fishing boat in which he left came to grief. But the general idea is that he went down with the skipper and his crew. Nothing has ever been heard of him since that night by anyone around here." "Then it would likely seem that he was drowned. Or might he not have left the country and gone back to Africa, for instance?" "Yes, that would be probable enough, if they were able to land him before the worst of the storm." We had come to the junction between the footpath and the Ardliston road, and here the doctor bade me good day, remounted his pony, and trotted homewards, while I turned my face towards the castle, where I arrived only a few minutes before luncheon. I was surprised to see the station brougham waiting at the door, with a portmanteau, a small black trunk, and a travelling bag on the roof. "Who is going away?" I asked the groom, though the S.P. painted in bold red letters upon the portmanteau, left no room for doubt. "Her ladyship is leaving by the 2:40 train, ma'am." "For London?" The groom did not know. I ran into the house and to the dining room, where I found Lady Selina and her niece, the elder lady evidently out of temper, and the younger grave and composed, but very pale, and with that eager look in her eyes which has distinguished her of late. "What wonders are happening!" I exclaimed. "To think of you deserting us like this, aunt. Are you going to London?" "No, not nearly so far." "Where, then, if one might venture to ask?" "One may ask anything, Cora, but my movements are so uncertain that it is hardly worth entering into particulars. I hope to be home again in a day or two. If there should be any need to write to me, my aunt has an address that will find me." "What shall we do without you?" "I daresay you will contrive to exist." A servant appeared at the dining-room door. "Are my things in the carriage? Is Ferriby there?" "Yes, my lady. Kingdon says it is time for you to start." Kingdon is her ladyship's particular coachman. His office is to drive her, and no one else, and to be waited upon and worked for by 3 or 4 underlings. "You had better let me go with you, Sibyl," said Lady Selina, as if following up a previous request. "Impossible. Take care of yourself, auntie, and of Cora." "How shall I explain your absence to Penrith?" "I have explained in a letter. Goodbye." She kissed her aunt, gave me a friendly nod, and hurried away. We both followed to the hall and stood disconsolately watching as the brougham drove away, with Lady Penrith inside, and Lady Penrith's confidential maid with her. Most women in her position would have a highly trained Parisian, with fairy fingers for the adjustment of ribbons or lace, and with fine taste in hairdressing. Lady Penrith has kept the woman who came to her from a village school, and has been in her service for over 10 years. If one were inclined to think evil, one might suspect her ladyship of some secret reason for keeping this woman about her. Old servants are not to be lightly dismissed. They know too much. But I must add that Ferriby spoke of her mistress with a frankness and freedom which one would not expect if there were any secrets in Lady Penrith's life. Lady Selina ate her luncheon in silence, evidently out of temper with her niece and in things in general. She sent away some roast pheasant because it was too high. She objected to the fricasseed fowl because the mushrooms in the sauce were underdone. "I think Lady Penrith has about as bad a chef as money could buy for her," said Lady Selina, "and I have observed that the higher wages people give, the worse cooks they get. We had a cordon bleu at Basingstoke House for £40 a year. My father couldn't afford a man cook, but we had better dinners than people who are giving £300 a year to a chef. Better everyday food, I mean, my dear." And then the spinster thawed, and read me a long lecture about the management of a great house, which I fear can never be of the slightest use to me. A shabby London lodging or a tiny villa in a dusty suburb is the only hope I can see waiting for me in the dismal desert of my future. Lady Selina ate an enormous luncheon in spite of her abuse of the cook, and talked for nearly an hour about the folly of masters and mistresses and the iniquity of servants, of her nieces who managed well, and her nieces who managed ill, till I found myself upon the point of dropping asleep. I proposed a drive before tea. Lady Selina has scarcely finished her lunch when she begins to look forward to her tea. No, she didn't care about driving. There were only 2 tolerable drives, and she knew them both by heart. She would sit by the fire and get on with her work. So by the fire I left her, promising to go back to her at tea time, and went to the billiard room. My father had gone out shooting by himself directly after breakfast, and was not likely to return until dusk. So I had the room and the table to myself, and I gave myself an hour's practice, making the most brilliant flukes and some really clever cannons, and accomplishing the spot stroke 6 or 7 times in succession. It is wonderful how good a game I can play when I have no opponent and no gallery. An hour of this work tired me, so I put on my hat and set out on another ramble. My mind has been so thoroughly unhinged of late that nothing but a long walk seems to do me any good, a long, lonely walk in a wild, bleak landscape. No doubt Lady Penrith has gone to Keswick. The 2:40 train stops at Keswick. I looked at Bradshaw in the hall on my way to the billiard room. She has gone to join Coverdale. There is something mysterious going on in which he is her agent and preux chevalier. Were she a different woman, were he another man, I might suspect a guilty intrigue. But if I could suspect her of evil, I could not believe evil of him. If ever there were truth and candour to be found in mankind, they are to be found in John Coverdale. He is a King Arthur among priests. Ah, if I had but been handsome! Oh, if he had but cared for me, how I could have cast off this slough of wickedness which has gradually grown over me, and over my mind and my heart, and I would have emerged from the dismal swamp of past experience a good woman, purified by his love, ennobled by sympathy with his noble nature. I cannot imagine evil where he is concerned, so I can only think that secret business which enrages Lady Penrith and her friend has some relation to her past life, to the romance of her girlhood, to the tragic story of Braddon Mountford. My idea is that the man has come back from Africa, and that Lady Penrith and Mr. Coverdale are engaged in finding him some safe retreat, some secluded spot where he might be out of the reach of the law. The afternoon has been dull and bitingly cold, and I am sitting as close as I can to the cosy fire in my comfortable room, half dressing room, half boudoir, whose thick walls keep out wind and weather. A very comfortable room. Indeed, there are no comforts or luxuries lacking in my life at Killander Castle, and if it were not for the uncertain tenure by which I hold these things, the dependence upon her ladyship's liking, I might be happy. Happy, quotha, with such a father at my door. Happy, with the gnawing knowledge that my plain face cuts me off from the golden chances that lie all along the pathway of a pretty woman's life, like the enchanted apples that distracted Atalanta. When I came in at 5:30, I found to my great relief that Lady Selina had a headache and was lying down, so I came straight to my own snug room, threw some logs on the fire, and had my tea tray, with a pile of those delicious little pastry cakes which the still-room maid makes to perfection, brought to me here, and here I am at 7:15, still scribbling the record of the day, for my own amusement only. I find an undiminishing interest in this volume. The facility with which my pen runs along the page makes me think that I shall some day blossom into a novelist. I see myself, 10 years hence, a spinster novelist, in a snug little house in Mayfair. The merest doll's house would do, provided it were in a smart street. That would not be half so bad. My father might be dead by that time. I'm not calculating on its death in a cold-blooded manner, but we are all mortal, and it is only natural that I should look forward to the years when I may stand alone in the world, free from a tie that galls me, but perhaps without a friend. I must be a fool if I quarrel with the one friend who has made life pleasant for me, a fool if I let envy and all uncharitableness set me against Sybil Penrith. Yet when I see her absorbing John Coverdale's attentions, see her spoiling what might have been my chance of winning his affection, it is very difficult for me not to hate her. To see her so handsome, so richly provided with all the good things of this world, so scornful of the wealth for which most of us are ready to sell our souls to Satan. I can't help remembering that she has done nothing to deserve this good fortune except take the trouble to be born, as somebody said, of a French patrician. Well, at any rate, let me think twice before I do anything to forfeit her friendship. I won't be in any hurry to tell my father of this sudden journey of hers. It is clear to me now that he means mischief. I am worried and perplexed by his hanging about this neighbourhood, living almost in hiding at the inn at Ardliston, and I shall feel it a profound relief when he is gone. Why should he linger here? He can hardly mean to make a further appeal to my uncle, to be again insulted and repulsed. What a hard-hearted wretch Penrith must be. Granted that my father behaved badly in his courtship of the heiress, what superior merit can the Earl boast of on his own part? He too wanted the fortune, much more than the lady, and I dare say would have stooped to any meanness to win her. I saw my father this afternoon. Saw him amusing himself in a solitary way, just like his brother, who I believe is happier now the house party has gradually melted away, and he can prowl over the hills alone with his gun and dogs, than when he had his friends about him, and when the great stone hall used to echo their talk and laughter as they set out in the morning. I was walking along the topmost ridge of the hill in the keen frosty air when I caught sight of my father in the valley below, crossing a stubble field, with his gun under his arm, a gun but no dog. Could he be poaching? I wondered. I knew so little of the game laws that I don't know whether it would be poaching on his part to shoot any bird that he chanced upon in those fields, but as I believe all the land around here belongs to my uncle, and as they are ill friends, I concluded that the Honourable Hubert Urquhart, heir presumptive to the title and estates, can be no better than a common poacher when he knocks down a pheasant on his brother's land. Heir presumptive, quotha. In the reading of the description of some sprig of nobility's marriage the other day, I read that as heir presumptive to the Duke of Dash, he had been handsomely provided for by that nobleman. As heir presumptive, all that my father has received as heir presumptive is what Lady Penrith's nephew would call the dirty kick-out. Hideous slang, no doubt, but it best expresses the treatment that my brother, as younger brother, received from the elder, as heir presumptive. The sky was darkening, and the hard ground was hardening under the frosty wind. I saw my father creeping along by the low stone wall, with his gun, stopping to look about him every now and then, intent on pheasants, no doubt. There was nothing left of the sun but a low yellow light behind the dark shoulder of the moor, and eastward the shadows of evening were stealing over the leaden-coloured sea, but there was light enough for me to watch my father's movements. He was queerly dressed, and looked like a keeper or even a keeper's underling. It amused me to watch his movements with a touch of contempt for the sporting instinct which could gratify itself at the sacrifice of self-respect. To steal the birds upon the land of a man who had heaped insult upon him, and that man his brother. He passed through a gap in the stone wall into a second field, a field I knew well, for it skirts the footpath by which the shooters often come down the hill on their way home, and along which I have tramped with him many a time. How merry we have been sometimes along that path! What trifles have set us in a roar! That little snub is an amusing little beast, but I'm afraid I need to laugh at his jokes with a frankness that disgusted the Reverend John, if he happened to be with us. Not that there was anything really wrong in the jokes, only a touch of vulgarity, a flavour of the mess room and the stables. But men like John Coverdale are so easily scared. And then there is all the difference between a pretty woman and a plain one. From Beauty's lips, even the slang of the saddle room has charm. Human nature has such strange sports and varieties. There are men, starched prigs like John Coverdale, who are fascinated by their opposites, and who make themselves the world's wonder by choosing a wife out of the gutter. But such men are poor invertebrate creatures, in spite of the starch. Their prim propriety is only outside wear. Not so with John Coverdale. With him it is the whiteness of a lofty spirit. He is firm as a rock, knows his ideal, and will accept nothing less than perfect and pure. And he has found his ideal in Lady Penrith, whom he can't marry, but whom he can worship. The thought of those homeward walks in the twilight with him, in those hours when he condescended to talk with me as a friend and intellectual equal, and when I felt myself another creature, the very thought of that past, so recent yet so far away, made me melancholy. I am not prone to the melting mood, but there were tears in my eyes as I watched my father stealing along the stone wall toward the high tangled hedge which divides the field from the footpath, one of the few real rustic English hedges around here, where the fields are so large and for the most part bounded by ugly stone walls. What a stealthy air a solitary sportsman has! How much more like a poacher my father looked, creeping along under the shadow of the hedge, waiting for his chance. No dog to point or put up his bird for him, only the chance of some belated pheasant lumbering heavily home to its cover, or rising scared at the sound of those stealthy footsteps. It seemed very poor sport to my mind, but I can imagine that my father may feel a malicious pleasure in shooting a brace or two of Penrith's pampered birds, which are said to cost him half a guinea apiece, almost within earshot of the castle. He was not very lucky while I watched him, for he only fired once, just as I was turning my footsteps homeward across the open moor. Only one shot. How it echoed along the silent valley, with a sharp, rattling sound, which set a regiment of rooks screaming and chattering high above my head in the grey evening gloom. The cold grew sharper with the sinking of the sun, so I hurried home as fast as I could to my snug room and the rousing fire and the plenteous tea-table. Assuredly, in choosing between my father and Lady Penrith, I should be a fool if I were to hesitate as to where my loyalty should be given. 8 o'clock, and I am only half dressed. No matter, for there will be nobody sitting down to dinner in the castle to-night. I was in the midst of my dressing-room when I was startled by a tremendous ringing of bells and opening and shutting of doors below. Could Lady Penrith have returned unexpectedly? No, it must be something more than that. The sudden arrival of a whole family could hardly cause such noise of hurrying footsteps and ringing of bells as I heard reverberating through the stone hall and corridors. I flew out to the gallery to listen, wrapped in my dressing-gown, with my hair streaming, and there stood, trying to make out the meaning of these sounds. but they gradually died away into silence, and I was none the wiser. An inexplicable terror was upon me. My hands were shaking. Then, when I knew nothing, my teeth chattering, almost as badly as my hand shakes now as I write this, now that I know the worst. Agonized with that dreadful uncertainty, I went along the gallery to the great open space at the top of the staircase, hearing low murmurs of several voices and the heavy tread of feet upon the stairs as I hurried on. I knew what that tread meant. They were carrying something upstairs. The something was Lord Penrith. 4 men were carrying him slowly, very slowly, up the broad staircase to his bedroom, and he lay in their arms without sound or movement, as much as one finger of the hand that swung loosely from the sleeve of his dark grey shooting jacket. I drew back into the shadow and saw that awful group pass by almost in silence, while a servant who had gone in advance opened the door of the bedroom and lighted the lamps inside. They passed in with their burden, and the door was shut. I ran downstairs and found plenty of people standing about, eager to tell me what had happened. He was dead. It was an accident, a common kind of accident, which might have been avoided by the most ordinary precaution on his lordship's part. He had been found shot to the heart and lungs, lying across a gap in the hedge, his gun by his side. One charge exploded. It was the old story of a sportsman scrambling through the hedge with his loaded gun in his hand. His lordship had dismissed the keeper late in the afternoon and had walked home alone. The keeper thought he would have gone the shortest way by the footpath, but instead of that he must have taken a somewhat wider round and skirted the big turnip field to get into the footpath by the gap at the lower end, a gap which the shooters had used very often that season. They were all eager to give me the details. His favourite Clumber spaniel had been with us and had come back to the castle in a cowed and frightened condition, which had given the first alarm at the kennels, the men seeing that something was wrong with the dog, and apprehending an accident to his master. And then the stablemen started in a body to search the homeward track, and they found their master in a hedge at the bottom of the hill. A stone wall divides the turnip field from its neighbours on 3 sides. There is only the hedge by the footpath, almost the only hedge upon his lordship's estate, moaned the house steward. Why do I place these things on record? God knows. My hand shakes so that it is difficult to write. My fire is nearly out. I sit shivering beside the smouldering logs, and my room, which looked so bright and cheery an hour ago, is now the picture of desolation. The northeast wind is shrieking outside my window. I shall write no more in this journal. I close the book forever this miserable night. My heart is frozen. End of chapter 27. Chapter 28 of Thou Art the Man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Thou Art the Man by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. Chapter 28. Death in Life. The telegram that summoned Lady Penrith upon her mysterious journey early on that fatal November afternoon was of the briefest. "Found. Come as soon as you like. I wait here for your reply. Coverdale, Lodore Hotel, Keswick." The reply was decisive. "I start for Keswick by the 2:40 train to-day." Mr. Coverdale was waiting on the platform when the train arrived. The grave, kindly face seemed like a welcome, and Lady Penrith felt cheered and sustained by his greeting. He had a carriage waiting for her, looked after her maid and her luggage, and then took his seat beside her, and spared her all the agitating questions by telling his story at once and fully. "In the first place, I have found him," he said. "Plain facts first and details afterwards. I have found him. He is desperately ill, a changed man from the man you remember at Ellerslie. You must bear that in mind, Lady Penrith. You have to prepare yourself for a terrible shock in seeing him after 10 years, which have done more to alter him, poor fellow, than twice the number would in a happy life." "Desperately ill. So ill, so changed," she faltered, trying to keep back her tears. "Tell me the worst. Don't be afraid to tell me. Will he know me again? Is his mind affected?" "Seriously affected, I fear. I would not say that reason is altogether gone, but it is no longer a sane mind. There are hallucinations alternating with a dull apathy. The treatment may not have been cruel, has not been actively cruel, for there have been intervals since yesterday in which he has talked rationally and answered all my questions about his life at St. Jude's with perfect clearness. But it has been the worst possible treatment for such a case as his. It has been murder, deliberate murder, and those people at St. Jude's have acted as hired murderers. Mr. Carpew has been your brother-in-law's paid agent. I think there is no doubt of his guilt in that degree. Mr. Urquhart has an extraordinary influence over him, some stronger hold than money, but it is not worth while to enter upon that question. The wrong has been done, and cannot be undone. It is possible that this poor fellow might have degenerated in bodily and mental health under the happiest circumstances." "What does the doctor say? No doubt you have called in a doctor." "A man of the highest repute in the neighbourhood. He considers the case one of epilepsy, pure and simple. Epilepsy in that severe form in which the frequent attacks tend towards lunacy, and too often result in lunacy. He does not think the patient likely to be long-lived." "Long-lived? A life of misery. Oh, God, to think of what he was when I knew him. Oh, if you could have seen him then, Mr. Coverdale, young, handsome, a king among men, his mind so highly cultivated, knowing and loving all the books I loved, so full of enthusiasm, telling us of adventures that showed such courage and ready wit, unconsciously, for he was the last of men to boast of what he had done. And now you tell me that he is a wreck in mind and body, a creature to be pitied. To hear you speak of him just now as this poor fellow—" She burst into tears, crushed and humiliated, as if Braddon Mountford's humiliation bowed her proud head to the dust. "Pray bear with me," she said, as Coverdale murmured some consoling commonplace, hardly knowing what he said, his heart aching for her as it had never ached before for a woman in sorrow. "Think what it is for me to have loved him as I did love him. These lips told him so only a few hours before Marie Arnold's death, and to find him thus, "Bear with me, Mr. Coverdale. You are a good man, my true, kind friend, the only friend I can look to now." Coverdale was silent, not daring to trust himself to speech in answer to that declaration of friendship. "How did you find him?" she asked after a pause. They were driving along the road by the lake through the drizzling rain. An expanse of dark grey water stretched in front of them, with mountains on either side, and wintry gloom brooding over mountain and lake. It was not easy, but still it only required patience and the following up of every clue. I have had to hunt for people in the East End, and I have found out that there is only one way of doing it. I had the Keswick police to help me, 2 men who knew the neighbourhood for a good many miles around, and with their help I soon discovered traces of him. The arrival of an invalid gentleman and his friend at a lonely farmhouse on the further side of Buttermere had been heard of at an inn in the neighbourhood, an inn used by excursionists in summer, but almost deserted at this time of year. We found the man who drove them there, not one of the flymen who ordinarily meet the trains, but a man from a livery yard engaged by a telegram overnight. Had one of the station flies had been employed, we should have made our discovery much sooner, for naturally my first inquiries were among those men. "What kind of a place? What kind of people?" asked Sibyl. "A decent farmhouse. Very lonely, a place to hide in. Decent, kindly people, anxious to do their best for their charge, I believe. He had been sent to them by Mr. Carpew, whom they had known a few years ago when they had a farm near St. Jude's, a farm on your father's estate. They knew nothing of the man who brought him, had never seen him before to their knowledge, but they knew Mr. Carpew and were willing to oblige him. They were to be paid for the gentleman's board and lodging, and for a man to look after him, and all that was wanted was seclusion and secrecy. The poor gentleman had relatives who wanted to put him in a lunatic asylum, and who would perhaps make out a case of lunacy against him if they could get a hold of him, though he was by no means a lunatic. Mrs. Holloway, the farmer's wife, seems a kindly soul, and her sympathies were aroused by this story. Thank God he has not fallen among thieves. So far as these people are concerned, are you taking me to him now? I am taking you to the hotel, where I have engaged rooms for you. I hope you will rest quietly for tonight, and tomorrow morning we will start for the farm as early as you like." "Why should I wait till tomorrow? I am longing to see him, to know the worst about him. You tell me he is ill, a broken man. Your manner implies that he is very ill. He may die before tomorrow morning, and then I shall go down to my grave without having seen the man my foolish, unreasoning love helped to ruin. Lady Penrith, you must not look at this story in that light. No one can tell what influence surrounding circumstances may have had upon him. It is possible that he was doomed to suffer as he has done, that in the brightest lot his fate would have been the same, and if he committed the crime for which he was arrested— No, he did not commit that crime. Don't speak of it. I am angry at the thought of my own folly, the web of lies in which I was caught. Let us go to the farm at once. We can stop at the hotel just to get rid of Ferriby and the luggage, and then drive on. Not on a dark night like this. The distance is too long. The drive would not be without danger, and you would see the patient at his worst, startled by such a late arrival. I want to see him at his worst. I want to know all he has suffered in those long, dreary years. But think what the shock might be for him. He must be prepared for seeing you." "Is he not prepared already? Have you told him nothing of my anxiety about his fate, my bitter grief for his sufferings? Yes, I have spoken of you, but perhaps not enough. Be assured it will be better for you and for him that you should defer the meeting until tomorrow. You have been so good to me that I cannot disobey you," Sibyl answered with a sigh. "What is the name of the hotel where I am to stop?" she asked. "The Lodore. I thought you would like to be by the lake and away from the town." "Yes, I gave them no address when I was leaving. I was afraid Penrith might follow me and interfere in some manner. I must go back tomorrow afternoon, when we have decided what is to be done." "Has Mr. Mountford no near relations? Is he quite alone in the world?" "Quite alone. He has no relation nearer than my uncle, Lord Braemar, and they are only second cousins, a relationship which does not count for much in a large family like my grandfather's. I was interested in him for another reason over and above the relationship. His father loved my mother hopelessly, loved her even after he was bound to another. His son told me the story of that sad, hopeless love. "Oh, Mr. Coverdale, forgive me," she said, startled by a stifled sob from the man sitting by her. "Pray forgive me if I have touched upon some sad story of your own." "No, no, it was nothing," he said hastily. "That kind of story, the idea of a hopeless love, a hopeless grief, manfully battled with, is always pathetic. You remember Warrington's story, a mere episode in Pendennis. It moves one more than all the rest of the book, doesn't it? Ah, here we are at the Lodore, and now I shall leave you to get as much rest as you can till tomorrow morning." The carriage stopped in front of the hotel. Lady Penrith's maid alighted. The porter took the luggage. Lights shone brightly in the hall within, with all the stir and bustle of an important arrival. Head waiter and head chambermaid were in eager attendance to show the way to her ladyship's rooms. A titled visitor in that dead season of the year was worthy of exceptional respect. "I am staying at the Keswick Hotel," Coverdale said as he bade good night, "but I will be with you as early as you like tomorrow, in a carriage and pair of good horses. You had better bring your maid. The journey will be long and tiring, and if we should have a hopelessly wet day—" "I am not afraid of bad weather. Would 8 o'clock be too early for you to be here?" "Not too early for me. If I can get the livery people to stir early, I will be with you at 8. Only I beg that you will try to rest to-night. They have given you rooms looking towards the lake, and I hope the sound of the waterfall will be only loud enough to serve as a slumber song. Do not think of me. You have taken worlds of trouble. I don't know how I should ever thank you. Don't thank me. I have to take much more trouble at the East End for duty's sake. It will be my most cherished memory that you look to me for help in your anxieties. Good night." He did not even stop to shake hands with her, but left with a stiff bow, which seemed curiously at variance with the suppressed emotion in his voice. He went back to the carriage through the rain, and she heard him drive away, leaving her with the long evening before her in a strange hotel. A 2 hours' drive through the morning mists brought Lady Penrith and her companion to a solitary farmhouse hidden amongst the hills, a spot more lonely than even St. Jude's vicarage. But this rustic homestead, with its group of barns and stable yard in the background, and its little garden where autumn flowers still lingered, had a more cheerful aspect than the straggling stone house at St. Jude's with its walled garden and gloomy firs. Braddon, Mountford, Yes, this was Braddon Mountford. This tall, wasted figure, this hollow-eyed countenance, with the downward melancholy lines about the mouth, and the nervous contraction of the brow, and the wasted hands that lay in helpless inaction on the arms of the chair. Sibyl stood gazing at him in awe-stricken silence, almost as she might have looked at a ghost. She could find no words to say to him, no words of pity or affection. Speech seemed frozen. Vainly had Coverdale sought to prepare her for the shock. The anguish of the spectacle was not lessened by anything that he had told her. The silence lasted for minutes. Coverdale heard the old clock in the passage ticking solemnly on, as if it were measuring out a long lifetime. So hopeless seemed the duration of that agony. The woman standing statue-like, white as marble, the man sitting with eyes that glazed idly out beyond the open window across the little garden, where the asters and marigolds made a bank of gaudy colour to the grey dimness of great rugged hills. The mist had cleared from the lower landscape, and the air in the shelter of the hills had a summer-like softness. At last, over the blank melancholy of that altered face, there crept a slow, vague smile, and Braddon Mountford lifted his eyes towards Sibyl. "I knew that you would come," he said slowly. "I knew that you would understand my message, though I have almost lost the trick of writing." "Braddon, you know me! You know me!" she cried, sinking on her knees by his chair, clasping one of his wasted hands, deadly cold to her touch. "Know you? Yes, of course. You have been cruelly treated. But that is all over now. All that this world can give you of happiness shall be yours. It shall be my care, the object of my life, to atone for your sufferings." "No, no. There has been no cruelty. It was my doom, the curse laid upon me. What could they do but hide me from my fellow men, a wretch, a murderer? I have suffered, but I have had my dreams of that wild country where I was so happy, centuries ago, centuries of weariness and pain. The black faces came back to me in dreams, the river, the forest, and I have dreamt that you and I were happy there, you and I, sitting together by the campfire. I have seen your face in the red light, and then the fire has changed to the fire of hell, and I have suffered like a soul in everlasting agony. I have suffered for my crime." In broken sentences, with piteous entreaty, she protested against his self-denunciation. "It is a dream," she said, "a horrible dream. You had nothing to do with poor Marie's death, except the misfortune to be the first to find her. You have been the victim of a diabolical conspiracy, a plot to hide away an innocent man in order to prevent suspicion falling on the real murderer." He looked at her curiously, as if lapsing into a reverie in which her words hardly reached him, looked at her wonderingly, as if her face were strange to him, and then his eyes wandered away from that earnest, eager face to the gaudy autumn flowers and the great grave hills veiled in the thin white mist. Alas, it was but too evident that the shadows which clouded his reason only cleared away now and again for a brief space, as the autumn haze parted and patches of the hillside showed clear and bright through a rift in the veil. "It is not wise to talk to him of that dreadful event," said Coverdale. "What we have to consider is what is best to be done for him. The doctor will be here at 12 o'clock. You may be glad to hear his opinion from his own lips." "Yes, I should like to hear what he thinks. But ought we not to have a specialist? We might telegraph to Edinburgh." "There will be time for that, by and by. Will you come into the garden with me?" "What, leave him alone?" "He has been accustomed to sitting alone. The woman of the house is within call. I should like to have a quiet talk with you out yonder." Sibyl did not answer him, scarcely heard him, perhaps. She was looking at Braddon Mountford in agonised contemplation. Whatever there had been of intellect or of power in his face a few minutes ago had vanished. Weakness, physical and mental, was all that could be read in that face now, a countenance of sickly pallor, every muscle relaxed, dull misery expressed in every languid line. This is what solitude and silence, the slow decay of monotonous years, had done for Braddon Mountford. If Sibyl could have looked back along that dark line of years, if some magic mirror could have shown her the pictures of the past, what would she have seen? First, a strong man caught in a trap, fighting with his captors for the release into free air of heaven, then suddenly subjugated and rendered powerless, not by their violence or their persuasion, but by the fell disease which the horrors and agitations of his life had intensified, which set its grip upon body and brain with a force never felt till then. She would have seen one seizure following upon another, with brief intervals of languor and exhaustion, till strength was sapped and intellect weakened but not destroyed. She would have seen a brave man submissive as a child to a bondage from which he could have been broken had he so willed, submissive because despairing. He was told that he was a murderer, that a warrant was out against him, that to escape from that dull prison house, that life of hopeless monotony, might be to doom himself to the gallows, or at least to the imprisonment of a state madhouse, a felon among felons, a lunatic among lunatics. She would have seen him, as his brain weakened and the power of consecutive thought gradually diminished, fooled by the hope of release. He should be got away later, when the coast was clear, should be got on board a steamer and drafted away to that dark continent of which he dreamt so often, where liberty and life were waiting for him, among the dark faces under the tropical sun, cozened from day to day, and month to month, from year to year, with that reiterated by and by. She would have seen him turning the pages of books that he had once loved, reading and forgetting what he had read, and she would have seen him gradually losing count of days and months and years, till time was one long blank, and his life knew no change save the change from heat to cold, and back to heat again, from sunshine pouring in at his open windows to the early darkness of endless winter nights, from the dark iron blank where the firelight had leapt and sparkled so merrily, to the welcome fire glow coming back again to fill the dull black void. No changes save the rain whipping at the window panes, the wind roaring over the distant sea, or shrieking in the chimney. There was thunder sometimes, a thunder peal that shook the house, and made him wish the roof would crack and the walls crumble and bury him among dust and ruin, and so make an end to this dull blank space and time which seemed to be endless, infinite space, infinite time. He repeated the words sometimes as if they had been a formula. "Who disputes that either is infinite? I have proved them both," he said. For not only did time seem endless, immeasurable, but in his frequent periods of hallucination, space also seemed without limit, and his weary spirit wandered in worlds that knew neither change nor boundary, neither night nor day, dim greyness peopled by silent ghosts, an endless labyrinth, or a wide stretch of barren sand leading to a horizon that was always the same, and yet forever receding. The commonest dreamer in a dream of a minute can invent and people a place unknown to his waking intelligence. But in the diseased brain that dreaming power, increased 100-fold, becomes a source of unspeakable suffering, a wellspring of horror. And what of his more rational hours, those longer intervals between one attack and another, when there was time for the brain to regain some touch of reasoning power? Alas, those hours of reason and remembrance were the worst of all, for in those he believed himself Marie Arnold's murderer, recalled the image of the corpse in the wood, brooded over the cruelty of such an end to that bright young life, and the shame and disgrace of the crime, disgrace reflecting upon all who were of his name and blood. Better that I should rot in this seclusion, he told himself in those waking hours, than that I should go out into the world to set men talking of my crime. Yet if it were possible, if I could get clear of England without scandal, could get back to the Zambesi and my faithful Kaffir boys, they would hardly think worse of me for that story of bloodshed. They would only pity me as the victim of witchcraft. And in such an interval, when his custodian came to him with the meal which only Mr. Carpew or his wife ever served to the mysterious boarder, Brandon Mountford would urge the fulfilment of that reiterated promise. Surely the time had come when he might go away. Whatever watch had been kept upon the house must have ceased long ago. He had lost all count of time, but he knew it must be long, and he looked down at his clothes, which had been replaced by ready-made garments more than once since he came there, and which were threadbare and worn at the edges. He looked at his wasted hands, where the muscles had been so firm and the flesh so hard and brown in those old days by the Salmon River. Yes, it was long, very long. Suspicion, watchfulness, must have worn out long ago. Why could he not get away? The vicar had various excuses. The danger was not over. His lodger was a marked man. Any movements in that lonely spot would excite curiosity. And then there was the question of money. It would cost a good deal of money to get him out of England and to pay his passage to the Cape. "And you wouldn't like to land there penniless," said the vicar. Penniless, yes. Penniless under those stars. He would not fear. Besides, he had friends in London, friends who would gladly help him, men to whom money was no account, if he could remember their names or where to find them. Ah, there was the agony. He could not remember. Names, localities, even the faces of the past were lost in thick mists of forgetfulness. Faces haunted him, faces appeared to him, rooms in which he seemed to have lived, gardens whose every tree and shrub seemed familiar, but he could not distinguish memories from dreams, the things which he had been, or even real today, from the things which his fancy invented. If Sibyl could have known how, through the clouds that darkened mind and memory, one image had shone like a star, unchanged and unforgotten, and that image hers. If she could have heard his appeal to his jailer, repeated day after day, "Let me see her. Has she had my letter? Have you sent a messenger to Ellerslie, as you said you would?" And how, day after day, he was put off with excuses and postponements. He was told that she had married Lord Penrith and was a leading light in the London world. It was implied that she had forgotten her unhappy kinsman and was indifferent to his fate. She was abroad in the south of France, an assertion that had been justified by her actual absence in several winters. But the same story had been told him when she was at Killander Castle. Tomorrow, and tomorrow. There had always been the same promise that his desire should be realised by and by, and as the brain weakened he had grown to believe in that by and by, and to wait and watch for her coming. He had written many such scrawls as the one which reached her hands, but on that last occasion he had been fortunate in his messenger, a starveling jack-of-all-trades who lived in a hovel at St. Jude's and did odd jobs for the farmers. The key had been left in the lock of the garden door for once in a way, and Braddon, who was allowed to walk alone in this joyous enclosure, had opened the door unobserved and gone out. He had no idea of escape now, having been told that escape was hopeless. He was too weak and helpless to even contemplate any act requiring prompt decision or sustained exertion. He only wanted to see Sibyl, to find some messenger who would carry his appeal. The garden door opened on the heath, but he could hear the sound of a pick in the road a little way off, and could see a bent figure breaking stones. It was the jack-of-all-trades doing a spell of parish work, and to him Braddon Mountford entrusted his message, hastily written upon a fly-leaf torn out of the book he had been reading as he stood on the windy road. He entreated the man to find Lady Penrith, to put that bit of paper into her hand and no other. He offered his watch as payment in advance for this service, but the man would not take it. The rough peasant was touched with awe and pity at the sight of that spectral face, and he was too honest to accept so valuable a gift. Half-witted himself, he may have had some instinctive sympathy with Braddon's clouded mind. He promised that the letter should reach Lady Penrith, whatever trouble it might cost him to find her, and he kept his word with a dogged faithfulness that would have done honour to the strongest intellect. And thus, by the accident of a key left in a lock, and by one act of forgetfulness on Mr. Carpew's part, Braddon Mountford had been released from a living grave. "Have you made any plan for his future?" Coverdale asked, as he and Sibyl walked up and down beside the privet hedge which divided the garden from the road. "I thought if we could take him to Ellerslie he might be happy there. He could have good servants. I could rely on Mrs. Morrison's care of him." "Not to be thought of for a moment," said Coverdale decisively. "In the first place, Ellerslie would recall the tragedy which changed the current of his life. The effect on his mind might be disastrous." "True, I forgot that. I have lived down the horror of those associations myself, and I forgot. Yes, you are right. Ellerslie would never do. Remember the warrant against him. Wretched wreck as he is, he might be put through all the torture of a magistrate's inquiry, might be indicted for murder, and have to stand his trial. The result, a state madhouse. Ellerslie would not do." No, the risk would be too great. Then what do you advise?" "Leave him where he is for the present, perhaps till the spring. I have made inquiries about these people, and they bear an excellent character in the neighbourhood. The man a hard-working tenant farmer whose father and grandfather worked on the land before him. The woman honest and God-fearing. Their connection with Mr. Carpew is simple enough. He was curate at the nearest parish church for a year before Lord Penrith gave him the living of St. Jude's, and during that year he became very friendly with the farmer and his wife. They are kindly people. Mr. Mountford will be perfectly safe under this roof until we can think of something better." "But what if the men who brought him here should remove him somewhere else, and we should lose sight of him again?" "I don't think it will be attempted. In the first place, we must engage a trustworthy attendant, accustomed to such cases, who must be responsible to us for his safety, with a man under him to relieve guard. I shall go straight from here to St. Jude's, and after I have talked to Mr. Carpew, I don't think there will be any further attempt to interfere with this poor man's liberty. The vicar of St. Jude's will see the peril of his conduct, and I will put it before him, as I mean to do. You might frighten him, but he is only the tool of a wickeder man, a man who will not hesitate at a crime." And then Sibyl urged the necessity of removing Braddon Mountford out of the power and beyond the knowledge of the man who had hidden him from his fellow men in order to sustain the suspicion, the almost certainty, that he was the murderer of Marie Arnold. So long as everybody at Ardliston believed in Braddon's guilt, no one took the trouble to look anywhere else for the criminal, said Sibyl. That must have been the motive of his imprisonment. To leave him in the power of Hubert Urquhart would be madness. And how can we be sure of his safety so long that that wretch knows where to find him? Mr. Urquhart is your husband's brother. It seems a hard thing to suppose him such an unmitigated scoundrel. Ask my husband for his brother's character if you doubt my estimate of him. But surely he would not suspect his brother of murder. Perhaps not, but he would tell you that he is vile enough to make any suspicion justifiable where he is concerned. Dear Mr. Coverdale, there is only one thing to be done. We must get Braddon out of this man's custody and into our own. Let us run all risks as to that warrant of 10 years ago, and take him to Ellerslie. He will be safe there with my housekeeper and my father's trusted secretary, Andrew Orlebar, a man who knows the whole story, and who would go through fire and water to help me. You cannot take him to Ellerslie, to the scene of the murder, without arousing curiosity among your neighbours. However few they are, there are enough of them to talk, and to revive the old story and the old suspicions. If a few days hence he were to be arrested, you would be sorry. Yes, you are right. It might be dangerous. Oh, Mr. Coverdale, what are we to do? We seem so hemmed-round with difficulties. Here is a life, a poor, ruined life, which has been given back to me as if out of the grave. Am I to jeopardise it, lose it again? Think what can be done. Something must be done to save him from the villain who plotted against him, made me his accomplice in my blind folly. There was a silence that seemed interminable to Sibyl's anxiety, as John Coverdale walked slowly up and down the shingly path by her side. She could see that he was deep in thought, and would not interrupt his cogitations by a word. Her patience was rewarded presently. He had thought out a plan, which he submitted to her briefly. My father has a shooting box in Argyllshire. He was there with some friends in August and September, but the place is deserted now, except for a keeper with his wife and a few shooting dogs. I will telegraph to the hospital at Carlisle for an attendant. Wait here till he comes, and when he comes, start at once for Scotland with Mr. Mountford. If he will trust himself to me, I can install him in my father's cottage in the care of the keeper and his wife, who are old servants, and will implicitly obey my orders. There could be no better plan, if Lord Workington will lend you his cottage. No difficulty about that. A telegram will settle the business. I must wait here till the attendant comes from Carlisle. You can return to the castle this afternoon, and you can send my telegrams from the nearest office on your way back. But to leave you here, to take so much of your time, don't mind that. I was to have been in London tomorrow afternoon, but one of my messages will be to the friend who is taking my duty, asking him to give me one more Sunday. By Monday or Tuesday I hope to have established Mr. Mountford at the hut, and from there I shall go straight to London. You may believe that I shall not abandon him until I am assured of his safety. I believe in your wisdom and goodness as I believe in heaven. I can never thank you enough for what you are doing. He will thank you perhaps some day better than I can, if the power to think ever comes back. Thank you for life saved, reason restored." And then she gave him a cheque for £100, which she had written before leaving the hotel for travelling and other expenses. She begged him to be lavish, to use the power of gold to the utmost. She would send further cheques as they were needed. He smiled his grave, sad smile at her eagerness. "It would be an impertinence on my part to refuse to let you pay any charges I might incur on your kinsman's account," he said. "But there will not be much money wanted. And now may I send for your carriage and your maid? You must be anxious to be on your way home again. I can write the telegrams while the carriage is being brought round." "Yes, there is no time to lose. You will tell the house surgeon at Carlisle that the attendant is wanted for a friend of Lord Penrith. My husband is a supporter of the hospital, and the authorities will do their utmost to oblige him. But I am to see the doctor," she said, looking at her watch. "It is past 12, and he was to be here at 12. I must wait to hear what he says about the journey to Scotland. And may I see Mr. Mountford one more time before I go, may I not?" "Certainly, if you like." Sibyl went alone to the parlour where Mountford was sitting by the fire, while the farmer's wife, a kindly-looking woman, was laying the table for a meal. "The gentleman has a very poor appetite," she explained, as she cut strips of toast to accompany a basin of broth. "It's difficult to get him to take his nourishment. He's nothing but skin and bone, poor soul." Poor soul. Pity the wreck of humanity that was Brandon Mountford's portion now. He looked up with sudden flush and a brightening of the haggard eyes. "Ah!" he cried, as if seeing Sibyl for the first time. "My messenger found you. Oh, my beloved, how I have waited and watched for your coming." He stretched out his wasted hands to her in passionate greeting. He had no memory of half an hour ago, when he had greeted her with almost the same words. The evidence of a decayed intellect cut her to the quick. The doctor came into the room at this moment, a young man, but serious and intelligent. He looked at his patient, sat by his side for about 10 minutes, questioning and observing him, then went out into the garden with Lady Penrith. "Be frank with me," she entreated. "It is a very bad case, is it not?" "Yes, it is a bad case." "Incurable?" One hardly likes to call any disease incurable nowadays. Medical science has taken to working miracles. Surgeons are cutting epilepsy out of the brain as they cut cancer out of the body. And with as much or as little success. With the same probability of success and the same hazard of failure, perhaps. He ought to be seen by a specialist, a man who has made epilepsy the study of his life. Yes, it would be well, by and by, for the satisfaction of his friends, that this poor gentleman should have the benefit of the highest opinion. But there will be time enough for that when his bodily strength is restored, if it can be restored, by care and good nursing. "You find him seriously, dangerously ill?" "Not dangerously ill, but in a very low and feeble condition. In a state which would make any illness dangerous, a chill, a fever, an attack of bronchitis. He would have no resisting power. He has been cruelly treated, kept in worse seclusion than if he had been in a madhouse. Solitude, silence, dull rooms, no change of air and scene. All very bad, no doubt, in a case such as his. and now it is proposed to take him on a long journey to Argyllshire. Can he bear such a journey? Certainly, as travelling is managed nowadays, he might be taken at night in a sleeping carriage with the greatest care, and with someone in attendance to administer stimulants. There need be no risk in such a journey, weak as he is, if the drive to here in Keswick is not made too fatiguing. Care shall be taken, the utmost care. We are sending to Carlisle for a nurse, but if you could spare the time to go with him, to superintend the journey, your fee should be anything you like to name. In a case of this kind there can be no question as to expense. You are very good. If he were to travel at night, I think I might spare the time from my other patients, and my fee should not be exorbitant. My practice is not a very remunerative one, and I have no pressing case just now which would make my absence hazardous. I need not be away more than 18 hours if we travel by the night mail. Everything shall be arranged to suit your convenience. Your presence will be a comfort to me and to Mr. Coverdale, who is now taking my poor cousin to Scotland, and you will see the attendant and give him full instructions as to treatment," continued Sibyl. "I will do everything that thought or experience can suggest. Then my mind will be at ease about him. Please write to me immediately after you return, and I shall have the pleasure of sending you a cheque." The doctor smiled, for he did not even know the name of this beautiful woman, whose earnestness and evident affection for that ruined life impressed him deeply. He asked no questions, for he knew enough about Lord Workington's son to know that he had to do with people of good position. The carriage was waiting in the accommodation lane which made the only approach to the homestead. Her ladyship's maid was there, and there were wraps and rugs enough in the open carriage for a journey to St. Petersburg. Once again Sibyl went back to the farmhouse parlour, and alone with Braddon Mountford this time, bent over his chair and pressed her lips to his wan forehead. Oh, God, the memory of that first kiss in the garden at Ellerslie, before the coming of sorrow. This might be her last memory of him. Who can tell? He was passing out of her sight once more. Who could tell if life would ever bring them face to face again? Life is so full of sad surprises, she thought, as she drove away from that quiet hollow in the hills, remembering the sudden trouble of 10 years ago, and in no wise foreshadowing that terrible surprise which was waiting for her within the hour. End of chapter 28.